Hello, my name is Kiriath, and last weekend I had my first 5 games of Age of Sigmar ever at a competitive tournament. I'm not saying like those are my first 5 that I've had at a competitive tournament, I just mean in total. I've had 5 games of Age of Sigmar, and that is where they took place, which is ludicrous when you say it out loud, but you know what? It actually went really well. I really enjoyed it. When I say went really well, let's just head off at the pass any hopes that this is going to be a tale of unexpected genius, that actually tactical acumen was just summoned out of nowhere, and no one expected the guy who'd never played before to come in and rock up to the top tables. But that's what happened, because that's not what happened. That is absolutely not what happened. You'll be shocked to learn that overall my tally was not 100% full of victory. It also wasn't 100% full of loss. Out of 5 games, I lost 4 majorly. But I also won 1 majorly. And you know what? I will take that. I'll take it. I'm happy with it. I went in there expecting to lose every single game by some considerable margin. But actually, I won 1, and Game 5 was really, really close. It was actually... I mean, I think it's fair to say, and I hope Miles would agree with me on this, that my opponent for Game 5, not just a random person, that for a minute there, it looked like I was going to win that one as well, but the dice gods are fickle, and sometimes they decide that they're just going to crush your dreams, which is pretty much the best way to describe what happened in that game. We will get to it, don't worry, because it's too ludicrous not to mention out loud. So, I took 2,000 points of Soulblight Gravelords to Facehammer GT, and it was great on multiple levels. Firstly, I will say that learning how to play at a tournament is, for me, one of the most effective ways to learn to play something I've ever tried, or I've ever, experienced. I'm one of those people who, before I left on the Friday, I was sat there reading the core rules again, and I was sat there looking at the General's Handbook for the pitch battles, and I was looking at the battle tome, and I was trying desperately to memorise everything I could memorise. I was like, I need to make sure that I know what I'm doing, I need to make sure that I've got all of this down. I can't show up and be like, oh, it's my first game, also I know literally nothing. I can't be that guy. I've got to have it rooted in there. Unfortunately, that's not really how I learn effectively. I can read stuff over and over again, but eventually it just exits. There's nothing to anchor it in place. I don't absorb it. It kind of goes in through the eyes and then leaks out through the ears when I'm not paying attention. And so, really, a lot of that prep work was kind of lost when the initial anxiety of just being there with a bunch of people who already know what they're doing kind of filtered through. There were other people there who had never played before, which was actually really fun and really interesting. I think there were a couple of other people who either had not played at all or had only had limited experience. Pete the Wargamer went as well. Met him, he was lovely, and I think he'd only had a couple of practice games before the tournament as well. So it's not like I was by myself. It's not like I was alone in this being kind of an experience unique to me. But when it comes to learning stuff, I kind of need to do it. I'm not a learn by reading, I'm a learn by doing person, and having the 5 games of AOS over the course of 2 days was a great way of learning how to play AOS, to the point where I'm reasonably certain, and this is going to sound really bad, but it kind of illustrates just how effective it is, I guess. I reckon I know the rules for AOS slightly better, just like the core, your core rules, your core how to play. I think I may know that slightly better than I do 40k now. Admittedly, I've not had a huge number of games of 40k over the last year and a bit, funnily enough. Lockdown, pandemic, all of that. I've been very, very strict and very careful about where I go and what I do. My daughter, my eldest daughter, does not have the best immune system. She had a very rough start when she was born, and she still has a few lingering issues from that, and so kind of trying to keep everything distanced has been very much a priority over the last year, which means that games of 40k have been few and far between. And the last game that I had was a battle report that I did with Mikey from Hellstorm. I'll put a link in the description because it was a lot of fun. We both enjoyed it a lot. But you can kind of clearly see how rusty I am in terms of 40k. Not so for Age of Sigmar, because having 5 games of it in very quick succession against people who fully know what they're doing, that really does a lot when you're the type of person who needs to learn by doing, to absolutely hammer home pretty much everything that you need to remember. I got very lucky, to be honest, in multiple ways with this whole experience. For a start, Russ and Byron from Facehammer went through and helped me build a list to take to this tournament, which was Soulblight Gravelords, Avangori Dynasty, because I wanted to have big, monstrous, nightmare creatures. But my initial thought was to take nothing but monsters, because, well, if you've been around this channel for any length of time, you know that I tend to fixate on one idea and then do multiple iterations of it. That's how I ended up with 4,000 something pointed dreadnoughts. That's why there was supposed to be one Chaos Knight to support my Emperor's Children, which then turned into just having an army of Chaos Knights and never finishing my Emperor's Children. That's also why I'm currently working on an armoured company for the Imperial Guard that is 1 Baneblade and 7 Leman Russes. I kind of have a way of working, which you can probably tell, which is to pick a thing and then repeat it in various iterations, making each one kind of unique and different from the last. That's how I like to work, and to be honest, doing that in AOS with monsters, with Terrorgeists and zombie dragons, right up my alley. It was pointed out when we came to build the list properly that having something to screen those monsters and to keep them alive may be a good idea, so we did that. Somewhat grudgingly, but I did do it. Obviously, that turned out to be a very good idea, because the Fellbats, the Direwolves that are in my army, the Corpse Cart that follows everything around at a pathetically slow speed, just hoping to get close enough to debuff the enemy, they all turned out to be, I would say, pretty pivotal in the army remaining alive and actually managing to capture objectives. So that was definitely the way to go. So I got very lucky in terms of the assistance that I got from Byron and Russ in terms of building the list itself. In terms of the actual games that I had over the weekend, I got super lucky as well. I mean, every person I played they were good opponents, but they were also like solid guys as well, who were more than happy to explain what they were doing, why they were doing it, how certain interactions worked that I wasn't sure about. In terms of like just game one, I was up against Owen Jackson, who is a legend AOS player, and he was there with his Arcearch Bone Reapers and Nagash. That game, I think, it was the perfect setup for the rest of the weekend, because for a start, I'm struggling to think of an equivalent to Nagash in 40k in terms of something you can put down like on the table. He's 950 points of a shed load of spells. Things like using the scenery, some of the scenery can hurt you, using the scenery to proc an ability that allows him to teleport anywhere on the table, using an endless spell, which is something that all the factions have access to extend the range of an ability that allows you to just instantly take something off the table. So, I mean, like, I struggle to think of something that is like an equivalent of that. It really kind of set me up for, oh, this is really different. There's stuff going on here that I just will not have had any experience of in terms of 40k. Admittedly, I've never been a competitive 40k player, so in terms of like what you might see in tournaments, I can't speak to that. But I have played a lot of 40k over the years, and it felt very, very different to that, which, I mean, I really enjoyed. It felt different in a positive way. At no point was I sat there going, well, I don't like this. I wish it was more like that. It felt very much like its own thing, its own entity. It didn't feel like a more complex or less complex or like derivative version of 40k. It just very much felt like its own thing, despite the similarities, which I just really enjoyed. So for game one, actually going up against Owen Jackson was really, really good, because I think there was probably... I don't want to like fully speak for how other people might have, like, in terms of like their internal monologue or their initial reactions to something, but I feel vaguely that the kind of overall reaction to me showing up at each of these tables and going, this is my first game, this is my second game, third game, fourth game, fifth game of AOS ever, like I've only come here, I've never played before this weekend, kind of mixture of, oh wow, okay, and that's pretty cool, let's go. I feel like there was a nice mix of those two for each person. And Owen was so good at taking me through just how everything worked, like interactions that I don't think you necessarily would think about when you're just reading the rules through. Remembering different things that you wouldn't really think about when it comes to making the shift over from 40k, or being used to another system. He was very good at explaining what he was doing and why, how things worked, without necessarily really compromising what it was that he wanted to do. I mean, he absolutely obliterated me. There was no way, at no point, I think, in that game was I at any real risk of winning in any way. But there were maybe one compromise. Let's be fair. I think maybe there was one compromise. See, Nagash has got an ability called Hand of Dust, which can just instantly kill one of your units. You just take it off the table. It's gone. But it comes down to a 50-50 chance. So on a successful cast, you put a dice in one of your hands, you then do a little bit of trickery, either under the table or behind your back, you hold your hands out, and your opponent has to pick the hand that's got the dice in. If they get the hand that's got the dice in, they survive. The unit stays on the table, you're all good, it's fine, you've survived the Hand of Dust. If you pick the empty hand, you're gone. You're in my case, Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon, I believe, was the thing that was being aimed at. If you pick the wrong thing, then off it goes. It's away. You've lost it straight off the bat. Now that seems kind of maybe a bit harsh in isolation. I will say, really fun ability. I did not mind it being used on me at all. And Owen was a gentleman. He didn't do it turn 1. He did it turn 2. so he did, perhaps in one small way, compromise what he was doing, because he didn't just go straight in on turn 1 and just remove something of mine off the board. He waited a turn, which I think very classy thing to do. I also saved it, so I picked the correct hand, and so I didn't lose the unit, which was, yeah. There's something. It feels like very mind-gamey in a way, because it's like, well, when he first picked the dice up, it was in his left hand, but he's not going to keep it in his left hand. He's going to move it to his right hand, but then he'll expect me to do... It's very easy to get in your own head, I think, doing that, which is why I just looked at the ceiling and just pointed in a direction that I knew that his hands were, and just picked the right one that way. But the exhilaration you get from being told, you got it right, I'm not going to remove, 450 points of your army immediately. That was quite nice. That was quite a fun feeling. I enjoyed that. That was cool. But I think that was the only compromise, really. Having that as a first game was great for setting up the rest of it, because it really highlighted, it was like a little microcosm of how different it's going to feel from what I'm used to. And it set me up super well for the rest of it, because Owen was, again, really good at kind of reinforcing things that you need to do on your turn, whilst managing to keep moving the game along relatively quickly, given that I was playing from just a completely inexperienced standpoint. I was going in with no prior knowledge, effectively, in terms of how stuff worked, outside of just reading it, which, as I said earlier, that's not my strong suit for learning stuff. So yeah, the first game set me up so well for the rest of the weekend. I also got super lucky in terms of the games that I had, because I had a good variety of games. Everyone that I played against was really, they were super solid guys overall, and they were all really good at having a level of patience that you probably wouldn't need for other people who are experienced players. Whilst, again, not compromising necessarily what they were actually doing in terms of trying to win the game. There were no, I don't think there were any, full-on gimmies. It was more a case of, well, you wouldn't know what this is. Another opponent probably would, so I'll tell you how this works, and you can make a decision from there. It wasn't a case of, well, you're not going to know how anything works, so good for me, let's go. Which is really nice to see. I mean, there's a video on this channel about not being that guy, or how to deal with that guy, and we've all dealt with that guy at some point. There were no that guys. They were all just good dudes. But yeah, I had a really fun spread of different armies to face off against. Started off against Ossiarch Bone Reapers with Nagash, which I feel like Nagash is borderline an army of his own, frankly. I mean, he's 950 points. It's like half the total value. So, kind of, that's not an incorrect statement to make. Then I was up against Head Knights of Slaanesh, and then then Sylvaneth, then Skaven, and then Stormcast Eternal. So I had a really interesting spread of totally different forces to up against. I'm pretty sure Pete the Wargamer ended up facing a couple of forces a couple of times. I don't think he had quite the same spread, the same variety. It was really cool meeting him. But I got very lucky in that respect. And I have to say, Game 2 was the one that I got the victory. And that was, I would say, the closest of all of them to just what I'm more used to, I suppose. That kind of turned into a massive fight in the centre of the board really quickly. It just turned into a lot of close combat, a lot of fighting, and that is an area where I managed to get the upper hand and managed to get some decent battle tactics off, and capture a few objectives. So the battle tactics are, you can pick one and you can't do it again. Things like if you run with 3 units and they finish within 3 inches of each other, then you get a victory point. If you slay the enemy warlord, you get a victory point. If you contest an objective, you get a victory point. And I managed to actually pull off some, I think, relatively okay moves in that game. But it didn't help that, some of the rolls for Matt, my opponent, didn't go the way he wanted. That's also just kind of the way things go sometimes, and I had my own experience of that. Man, I really had my own experience of that in like Game 5. I would say 3 of the games weren't close. They weren't close. I knew that things were not going well pretty early on and couldn't do much about it. Game 2 felt fairly close to start with, and then things very rapidly swung in my favour. Game 5, the last game of the weekend, was by far the closest in terms of like it kind of came down to the wire. It was like I was really sure I was going to actually win that one, and Miles, my opponent, was also pretty sure I was going to win, and then things just went catastrophically bad for me, but we'll get to that in a moment. But again, it was just really, really fun all around. In Game 2, it just felt more familiar. It, when you're in close combat and you're just rolling to hits, to wounds and saves, when it gets to that stage, it's just all stuff that you're used to doing and all stuff that you've done before, which was, I think, it felt a bit weird after how different Game 1 felt. But it was okay, because Game 3 was the weirdest game, mostly because of the list I was facing, which was a Sylvanas list played by Math Mallow, as he was known for the weekend. And, man, I don't even know how to properly describe this, because I'm not entirely sure I'd get it right. It was a Sylvanas list where they can use Wildwoods to teleport around the board. Like, go to move across the table. I don't know why I keep saying board. To move across the table, and it was a very shooting-heavy army. And the stuff that was shooting was also what cost most of the points. There was also Alariel in there, which is like the big faction leader, which was used very efficiently and effectively as bait, which I absolutely took. It was also an interesting deployment. So on the previous 2 games, it was a case of setting up on opposite sides of the table, the objectives are down, off you go. With Game 3, you were set up in the corners, and he'd set his Sylvanas up as far back as he could possibly go, like kind of like spread into the corner of the table on his side, because they're ranged. And it's about grabbing objectives and sniping things down and being almost impossible to catch by teleporting around the table. And man, it was weird. I got full on like blindness to what I was actually supposed to be doing. That was a game that was really interesting, precisely because of how badly I handled something that I just didn't know how to fight against. I didn't think about anything logically. It was just, well, if they stay at that distance, they're going to shoot the hell out of me. If I only go for the objectives, they're also going to shoot the hell out of me. There's a decent spellcaster there that could also cast a bunch of spells, and they've got the portal, so that could affect things as well. They're all crammed into the corner. My army's pretty mobile, it's pretty fast. I just need to get over there and just do... I need to get over there and do something. Meant I ignored the objective closest to me. I took the bait that was Alariel being out there by herself, which I should have immediately been like, that's clearly nonsense. I need to ignore that and, actually go for the objectives and try and push stuff off and contest stuff. But I didn't. I just got blindness. I just went fully like, I've got to deal with this. And I didn't deal with it. I lost horribly. Undeservedly so. And it actually was really, really helpful, because I was like, well, okay, that's something that I need to never do again. Which, it's all just lessons, isn't it? It's all just learning, and it's all kind of having a different experience every time and then taking that into the next game, which, again, an aspect that I never knew I would actually care about, but found myself really focusing on. Game 4 was against Skaven, and I've discovered that Storm Fiends hurt a lot, They put a lot of shots out. They can kill stuff so heavily. They like wiped out a couple of monsters fairly quickly on. Also, clan rats are a great shield, and the way that Matt, who was playing this game and laid his army out, was very well done in that I just couldn't quite fly over everything. I'm like, the army that I have, it's very mobile. The direwolves move at they have like a 10-inch movement. The flying stuff has a movement of 12 or 14. The slowest flying thing I've got has got a movement of 12. And so theoretically I was like, well, I can jump over and charge from behind, and I could just not get the positioning right at all. I ended up getting bogged down in clan rats. I couldn't quite get to where I wanted to go. And that was one of those games where I was like, that feels like something that I maybe could have done something about earlier on, but I wasn't entirely sure how to tackle this, and I'm still not. Like, that was a game where I wasn't sure what I could have done differently. Obviously, there will have been things, 100%. There will have absolutely been things that I should have done differently, that I could have done differently, that would have meant that the result was a bit closer than it was. But even now, I'm not entirely sure what those things are. So that's something that to just go away and look into and read about what the Skaven do and how to best combat it. That's just something that you're going to have to do extra work for outside of that setting to then take it back into it. Game 5 was by far the closest in terms of like not knowing who was going to take it right up until the end. Because I was doing pretty well in Game 5. It was a really interesting mission. It was the most interesting mission by far. The actual setup for it was my favourite of all of them. So it was just a case of standard, like, each of us has a side of the table to deploy on, but there were no objectives. There were none. The objectives didn't start appearing until turn 2, and they appeared at a random place on the table. Now, I loved that. I loved it and hated it at the start because I'm sitting there with an extremely mobile army with nothing to run for. Like, once you've deployed, once you've got everything dropped and you sat there and you're like, okay, wait, he's out of the effective threat range. I can't just go straight for him. That's not going to work. Like, my threat range is like 32 inches or something and he's further than that. So I can't just run in charge. That would be dumb. Well, I can't run in charge anyway. Only one thing in my army can run in charge, so that's not an option. If I just charge across the board and leave a bunch of holes in areas, then the Stormcast army I was fighting was also unusual, by the way. I say unusual. Maybe it's not unusual. I don't actually know what the meta is for Stormcast, funnily enough. But it had a lot of Annihilators, 12 I think total. And Annihilators are the newer ones that you get out of Dominion. Guys with the big shields and the big hammers. Terminator looking guys, basically. Also 2+ save, so Terminator guys. When they deep strike, because they come in via deep strike effectively, they deal mortal wounds to stuff that they land around. And then when they charge, they deal mortal wounds to stuff that they've charged. And that's all before they've actually attacked you. So I didn't know where they were going to... I just knew that if they landed, it would potentially wreck a good chunk of my army, and I wasn't sure what to do. I ended up sending a couple of, well, three high-value targets off to the left with a few bats to screen them, and hoping that either the Annihilators dropped in the main bulk of the army and wiped out some cheaper stuff, or they dropped on the other part of the army that had some high-value stuff and didn't kill it, and I was able to move them back. It did work. The Annihilators all dropped on one side of the board, which is what I was hoping for. But that was as far as I'd hoped and as far as I'd planned, because I didn't know where the objective was going to be. And it could have worked out super bad. That was one of those things where I was like, I don't know what to do. I just know that I can't have everything bunched up because that's going to be really bad, just getting mortal wounds everywhere. So they dropped down and I just had to hope that the objective was either in the middle or really far away from them. Because if they were close to them, that was bad, and that would probably mean that in like turn 2 the game was decided. A bit of a gamble, bit of a risk, but I didn't really know how else to approach it. I didn't know what I was supposed to do on a table with no objectives on it at all. So I did that, and I hoped for the best, and the first objective dropped, and it was on the other side of the table from the Annihilators. I'd lost a few things, I'd lost a couple of monsters, but I was able to move back the stuff that I had left into the centre, summon some wolves to protect her. I think it was only Lack of Eye that survived that, but I was able to have her protected by direwolves, and the entire rest of the army just moved its full movement onto the objective that had shown up. Then in turn 3, 2 more objectives dropped. One of them was right next to where my army currently was, the other one was closer to Miles's army, but by that point I managed to do a couple of good battle tactics. I managed to do Slay the Warlord, I managed to contest an objective and take an objective. I was actually doing really well for points. But his force was starting to move in. The Annihilators were starting to lumber their way across. They're going to have a 4-inch movement. So I was like, they're going to take a while to get there, so I should be okay for a little bit. I'd sent Radakar the Beast, who, by the way, was the MVP of my army the entire weekend. He spent the entire weekend brawling with stuff that, by all rights, probably should have killed him, and just not going anywhere. It's super good. He was fighting Indrasta, the Celestial Spear, the Stormcast with the wings, the spear and the sword. Great model, love that model. He was there fighting her and like some Vindicators and some other stuff. Sword and shield, spear and shield as well. Stormcast Eternals, I forget the names of them. Look, I'm not an expert still, I just played the one tournament. And he was doing okay. He was managing to hang in there. I'd managed to screen off the Annihilators. I'd charged some direwolves at them, cheap, dispendable. In fact, they were free because Radakar summoned them. So I was like, I was maintaining control of the board, and if I could kill Indrasta, then that would be it. That would secure it. That would be fantastic. If I could kill Indrasta, I was pretty sure that we could hold on. We'd get to round 5, and I would end up winning because I'd got all the battle tactics I'd aimed for. I'd just been all over the objectives like you wouldn't believe. It was going swimmingly. In fact, Miles did say that kind of going into turn 4, he was pretty sure that I'd won. Except then I tried to charge my Vampire Lord on Zombie Dragon, who was 3 inches away from Indrasta, and I rolled 2 1s, and then I used a command point to re-roll it, and I rolled 2 1s, and then I tried to use the ranged attack because she only had 3 wounds left, and the ranged attack could have killed her. Now the Zombie Dragon has a cool thing with its pestilential breath, where you can, before you roll to hit, you can roll a dice, and if that dice is equal or lower than the number of models in the unit, it automatically hits. Cool, brilliant. Rolled that. Indrasta's only 1 model, so I needed another 1. I didn't get a 1, I got a 2. Not surprising, but it's fine. So then it was a 3+ to hit, and I rolled the 1 that I needed before, which meant that Indrasta was still alive. The Annihilators were able to sweep through the direwolves and engage the Vampire Lord and Zombie Dragon, which then couldn't get to Indrasta. Radakar the Beast died because he was fighting like 11 things by himself, and at that point we conceded that, yes, I had lost by that stage because my entire army was slowly being mopped up, and by the time we got to the next round I would have lost all the objectives. I couldn't pull off any more battle tactics at all because I didn't have the numbers, and that he had gained a major victory which had very much been taken from my major victory. It was very much like snatching defeat from the jaws of victory, I suppose is the way to put it. That was an amazing game. I loved it from start to finish. I had a blast with every part of it. At the end of it, I didn't care that I lost, because there are some situations where you plan really well, and I was super happy with how I'd planned, and I was super happy with how things had panned out, and there was a lot of luck involved, but you know, there generally is whenever you play any sort of tabletop wargame. Some of it comes down to luck, and I was really chuffed with how I'd managed to actually react well to what had been going on. I thought I'd made the right decisions all the way through, but the dice had let me down. And in that situation, you can either get mad, you can get angry, you can be like, oh, this is bullshit, this is bollocks, I should have won, this isn't fair. But there's no point to that. That doesn't do anything. It doesn't teach you anything, you don't gain anything, you don't actually learn anything from that. And I just, at the end of it, was like, that was a quality game. Like, to the end, there were points where I was just fully rooting for Miles to pull off a charge or to do something, because there comes a point where things have gone as well as they possibly could for you, and if it's still not enough, then it's still not enough. And what are you going to do? So, yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed Game 5. I loved all of them. I didn't have... There was not a moment throughout that weekend where I was playing where I was, wishing I was doing something else, or felt like something wasn't fair, or that, I wasn't being treated fairly, or that, there was any sort of like elitism or anything like that. it was just fun. It was just fun from start to finish, and it was strangely addictive. Like, the process of learning from every game and the process of taking stuff away each time and having things to apply to the next game, I just flat out want to do it again. I want to take that army, I want to tweak it, I want to mess with it, I want to take it to other tournaments, and I want to see how far I can get with it. And I know full well that I will end up doing more stuff like that. And having avoided 40k tournaments for however long, like at this stage, for like what, over half my life, I guess I've been playing 40k in some fashion, it's kind of given me the push to try that as well. Because if it's anything like the experience I had over this weekend, it's worth doing just for the fun of it. Whether or not I intend to get anywhere, whether or not I'm that bothered about winning anything, in a way that doesn't matter. The whole deal was worth it just for the fun of it, and everything else was a nice bonus that has been kind of impactful in its own way as well. And I will say, on a kind of personal note, like, I mean, I suppose all of this is a personal note, really, but you guys, if you've been around the channel for any length of time, you know I've talked previously in the past about issues with like clinical depression and anxiety. I did have all of that kind of anxiety going in there. Like, I only knew a couple of people there. I only knew Byron. Like, Byron was like the only friend that I had there. Russ, whilst I've spoken to before, and we did the video on Facehammer talking about the list, like, that's the only real contact I've had with Russ. I knew that I was going to meet Pete the Wargamer, which I was looking forward to because I love his videos, and he was great, got along with him really well. But again, that's not someone that I know, that's someone I know of and have had a little bit of contact with, but not much. Actually having it be essentially an entire, 70 plus people of strangers, and still coming out at the end of it not really feeling like I had much of that anxiety throughout the weekend, because there was like too much happening and there was too much fun going on. That was a really kind of I guess like affirming thing to get out of it as well, and it's kind of eased my trepidation about doing this kind of thing again in the future, because I've had such a good like first experience with it that I think it kind of gives you the push you need to go on and do more. So yeah, I've really enjoyed it. I want to do it again. I'm looking forward to doing it again, and I'm just interested to see what happens next, honestly, because I want to take that Soulblight army to more tournaments and see what happens. I want to see if I can up the win rate a little bit, see how long it takes to get a properly positive win-loss ratio. That would be a lot of fun. Before we wrap it up, I suppose I should say a massive thank you to Facehammer for inviting me to the tournament, to Byron and Russ getting me all set up with a list, and for Byron to pushing me towards actually doing it and showing up and doing something that I've never done before, because he was right. It was a lot of fun. It was totally worth it. He knew that I'd enjoy it, and I did. So really, it's pretty much down to him, and all credit should go where it's due. And also a thank you to the 5 opponents that I faced: Owen, Matt, and Miles. I know that the middle 3 there probably felt a little bit confusing, but it's fine. Again, they were great guys to play against. Patient, understanding, not really compromising what they were doing, but prepared to talk me through what they were doing. It was a great first experience, and something that I would happily do again. So yeah, I guess I probably should. Anyway, that's gone on for a long time. Thank you very much for watching. Feel free to click all the things: Patreon, video, subscribe, all that stuff. Click if you like, don't click if you don't want to. And as always, there's an affiliate link in the description for Element Games, which you can use to support the channel if you would like. I leave it in your capable hands. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you next time.